Hello, everyone. Welcome to 5 Questions with a Feminist. I'm really excited today to be here with Heather Boerner, who's a journalist. And I'm Professor Felicity Schaeffer in Feminist Studies, and we're going to get to hear a little bit about Heather today and her work as a journalist. So let me introduce you, Heather. So Heather's an alumni at UCSC in women's studies, right before we renamed it Feminist Studies, and graduated in 1996 with a minor in journalism. I know, 1996, that was before my time even. So young. So Heather's a journalist and an author who specializes in telling stories at the intersection of science, society, and policy. Her work has appeared in many fabulous media outlets: NPR, Al Jazeera America, Rewire.News, The Atlantic, Washington Post, PBS NewsHour, and many, many others. She also has an amazing book called Positively Negative: Love, Pregnancy, and Science's Surprising Victory Over HIV, which came out in 2014. She lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with her partner, Paula, and their wildlife-friendly garden, which I love. So welcome, Heather. Okay, so your first question for us today is, tell us about your career as a journalist. Tell us what you love about it, or what's hard, whatever you want to tell us.
Well, that could take a very long time, but yeah, so I'm a journalist. I used to be a newspaper reporter for 7 years, and I've been self-employed as a journalist since 2004. And I've written about all kinds of things. I wrote about transportation and housing and education. And currently, until the last 10 years, I've written about HIV. And primarily as a way to talk about equity and inequities. I always say that the disparities are the story at this point. You know, we have the medications that work, we have prevention methods, we have everything, we know how to do it. So at this point, that's not the issue. So I try to write about that piece of it primarily, but I write for clinicians. I also write for regular people, and I really try to focus on telling stories and sharing the wisdom of communities that are often, well, not listened to. Won't say overlooked, not listened to. And yeah, and I try to write to them as well. So.
Oh, such good work, which gets me to my next question. How did you decide to major in feminist studies at UCSC?
Well, I arrived at UCSC in 1992, and so it'll be too many years by the time this comes out. But I arrived in 1992, and I was set to be a creative writing major. That wasn't totally set, but I went to an event that Bettina Apteker held before the term started, my very first term at college. And it was a combination of, here's what the Women's Studies Department is, and there was a discussion of a book, and I can't remember exactly what the book was, but it was essentially about the law, Black women's experiences with the law, sexual harassment, that the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings had just happened. So it was very pertinent. And I mean, I fell in love. Like, I went to that. She said, if you are here and you can't get into Women's Studies 101, come up to me and tell me. I couldn't get in. She let me in, and I was a Women's Studies major.
Wow.
You know?
And you know, Bettina just retired 2 years ago. I know, she's still around and still writing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, but she, yeah, she's a wonderful spirit. And I hope that the library still has recordings of her class. I remember when I attended that class, they did recordings. And
right. Yeah, we have it at the library and in the department. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear that feminist studies has shaped your professional goals. maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the major has really helped you.
What, more than anything, what the curriculum taught me, and interdisciplinarily and all of that, was that we value our own lived experiences over the gatekeepers and the so-called experts who are often, you know, white supremacist, heteronormative, cis, with that filter, and they are not objective. That was one of the main things that I learned. And we are our own experts, and we save ourselves. These were all the lessons that I learned from women's studies. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because it means so much to me. And, you know, I would say that it didn't solve my white savior complex when I first graduated into the field. You know, I thought I was going to tell the stories of people without a voice. You know, over time, I'm blessed that I've lived long enough and done enough work, hopefully, to realize that I'm not giving a voice to anyone. I'm taking cotton out of my ears and listening to people who've been talking and screaming forever about this, and they have their own solutions. So yeah, that's really what I think I've learned.
That's great. Well, tell us what your favorite feminist studies course was. That's hard to pick one, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all these years later, I still remember specific courses. I, of course, worship at the altar of Bettina Apteker. She changed my life just by being a human. And, you know, she was the best, most, for me, in my experience, most empathetic face for women's studies / feminist studies. And it changed my life. And, but I would also say there are two other classes that I still remember to this day. One, I think, was called, at the time it was called multicultural feminism. And it was kind of like an introduction, I think, for most of us white folks, suburban white ladies coming into the class, to like, your feminism isn't the only feminism. It was taught by Akasha Hull, and we read this bridge called Our Backs, and all sorts of other things that just was transformative for me. Then the final class I'll mention, and I apologize for going on, is I took a class with Elizabeth Haas in the history department that was on women's social movements. And it really took, I'd taken all this feminist theory, and it really took those theories and grounded them in a place and time in politics. And that has been crucial to my career, is that I put the things I'm reporting on in the social, political, policy contexts, historical contexts that we're in. And yeah, that was also an amazing class.
I will be sure to tell Bettina and Beth that you were.
I would love that.
Because I see both of them still. Both of them are retired, but I'm very close to both of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really great to hear. Okay, so you did say already that, you know, sort of this putting what you're learning in the context of the times, the politics of it, understanding that, you know, that there's no such thing as objectivity. Everybody speaks from a particular empowered location or disempowered location. Is there anything else you want to add about sort of something important you learned from being a feminist studies major?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing that I learned, you know, I was a feminist in high school. I was like the only feminist in my high school at the time. And I read The Feminine Mystique and Backlash in high school, and everyone thought that I was a dyke, and I was, but I didn't know it. But I really learned through all the different lessons about how important it is that we love us. Like, I had the lived experience of, I don't hate men, I just love women. Like, I love women's cultures, and I love creativity, and I love our power and all of that. and it was misinterpreted in the wider world.
Mhm.
And, we see that today with Black Lives Matter and all the other movements happening. And it really taught me the value and the importance of we love us,
Mhm.
and how important it is that us loving us helps us survive
Mm.
in the world. And it helps us make art and create solutions, and that there are no margins if you're part of that community. And that there's such beauty there.
Mm.
And practically what I learned as a journalist was that it's really important to ask who gets to tell the story.
Mm. Mhm.
And also, who am I writing to? Who do I think my audience is? Because if I think my audience for a story about HIV, for instance, is a white, middle class, upper class person with private insurance who has not experienced a lot of the oppression that a lot of people have, I write a very different story than if I write a story where I assume that the reader understands that systemic racism isn't a theory, it's a fact, or I assume they understand what it's like to go to the doctor's office and be discriminated against for a number of identities. And it's so freeing to write from the latter point of view and the latter audience than it is for the former, because in the former, you just kind of keep writing the same rote story over and over again, and it never goes anywhere because the inside, that in-group conversation among white people is never going to solve it. So those were the most important thing. And then just a personal thing that was most important to me was that the women's studies at the time department was the first place I ever saw a high fem. And I'm a high fem. And at the time in the 90s, everybody had a uniform and we all wore the same outfit. It was very androgynous, which is awesome. I love an androgynous person. Non-binary person, my favorite, but that wasn't me. And I really got to see people live their lives. And I just remember still having debates with people. Well, she can't be a lesbian. Look at the makeup she has on, And later, it took me years to be a queer high femme and know that, I can be feminine and flamboyant and articulate and brilliant, and also have a pink office, which I do, and also celebrate, traditional feminine handicrafts, and all the much maligned things don't have to be maligned anymore. Those are the things. That's what I learned by watching people.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, seeing all the different, that's what's important about having your professors, right? Queer, women of color, disability, disability, all kinds of different ways of being in the world and the complications of it. There's no one way, right? Sometimes our students, think there's only one way to be radical, but there's so many beautiful ways that we all do radical different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I've seen that in my career. I always say, people are articulate about their own stories. Most people, I'll do an interview and they'll say, I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm like, you're making all the sense. You make all the sense.
Yeah. In fact, the sense doesn't make any sense out there. So.
Right. I mean, there's definitely that right now, but always kind of. So yeah, I feel so blessed to work in a career where people are generous enough to share their experiences with me. I try to respect that. I mess up, but I try to respect it.
My final question was, what you'd like to share with other UCSC students. And I'm thinking about this question in relation to this difficult moment that we're in, and, how to persevere in what are always tough times for some groups. Right. And this is a particularly tough time for groups that have been struggling. But so what kind of advice maybe could you give some of our students?
Well, I mean, I think that it's a particularly traumatic time for a lot of us. Still recovering from the last 4 years and ongoing everything. And so one thing I would say is, just as a human being to another human being, is you don't have to be strong all the time. Everybody breaks, and that's okay. And we need to give ourselves downtime. And, you know, I'm not unique in saying this. There's the nap ministry on Instagram and other places that's like, you know, this is an act of resistance to rest. But I think that's critical. And I also think what I was going to say, and what I think is still important to say, is that your voice matters, that your wisdom matters, and that what I learned was that we make the world a better place. We try to make the world a better place, and just by being yourself, and to find the communities that support that. And for me, it was women's studies, and it was City on a Hill Press, because I was with them for almost the entire time I was at UCSC. Those were my communities that kept me safe. So I think it's both find the safety, and then within that safety, hopefully that gives you the strength to do the next thing. I mean, that's what got me through the last however many years. So.
Thank you so much, Heather. This has been wonderful. And we'll also post some information about you on the website and maybe ways to contact you, if that's okay.
Sure, I would love that.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'm going
Go do it. You can do it.